The way I met him was um, I organized a meeting in California. There was a thing we were trying to, we kind of invented it, by we, it's a group of students around MIT and faculty and so on, professors and so on. And time sharing was a way that all computers work today, but then the idea was to use a big computer, you had to make a schedule. They would give you a little slot of time. You would do it, print out stuff, and take it back and so on. But you couldn't use the computer because it was too valuable. So you had to, print out a bunch of junk right away, and then you could go take it back with you and see what happened when you tried to run your program. And this took forever. So I found that very offensive, and I was part of the effort to change the way people used computers. So what am I trying to get to?
You were talking about Feynman, how you met him.
How I met him. Okay. So the way I met him was one day I had an appointment out to meet him at Caltech. And I remember that as I was going out there, I had a bellyache. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I stopped and asked some people, and they didn't help me, They just offered me to take some stupid medicine that would cause me, like a laxative or something. But I just had this constant pain, and I'm working my way out, and finally I get to Feynman. And so I met him at Caltech, and I told him about this bellyache, and he says, well, I got a great doctor, you should talk to him. So I did, and he diagnosed it and said, the trouble is you're something or other. And he said, oh, it's something that's often removed by surgery. And he told me the story of a general in World War II, Mountbatten, was the head of the UK's army, like Eisenhower was our. And General Mountbatten had the same thing I had. And he knew, and he told me, this is Feynman's doctor, told me the story of him going to the doctor, and the doctor said, any doctor you tell this to is going to tell you to have it removed, but they're all crazy. Don't do it. And so this doctor now was telling me this same thing, that every doctor will tell you have your such and such removed. But, obviously it's still with me, whatever it is, and it's some organ about there that's easily removed.
So you're meeting Feynman for the first time?
So I met him. So here's how I met him for the first time. The first time I met him was that John McCarthy was fired from MIT as a nobody. And John McCarthy, in my mind, was about the smartest guy I'd ever met. He invented the term artificial intelligence. He did the first meeting in the world on it. So he is an assistant professor at MIT. And the question is, should they promote him to associate professor? So you start as an assistant, then you might become an associate professor. Then you might get tenure. And then you might get, if you got tenure, you would almost certainly be eventually promoted to a full professor. Okay. So that was the general thing that happened to professors. So John McCarthy, MIT didn't appreciate him. They thought he was just some kind of jerk, so they wouldn't promote him.
closely.
Okay, okay. So they wouldn't promote him. So what happened is he told Marvin Minsky and me that he wasn't going to stick around at MIT because they told him to get lost, you know. What they tell you is leave before we fire you because it's bad to your reputation to be fired. Okay, so he decided to come back to Caltech. He had been an undergraduate at Caltech, was a star. Okay. So he went to Caltech, and Marvin and I were at a meeting that I'd arranged, and John, all of them, we were at this meeting, and then John said he's going to go stop by Caltech and see if they'll hire him. And so I always would rent a car, which was surprising to everybody else because I'm a Californian and cars are important. So I offered to give him a ride because how else is he going to get to Caltech? So Marvin decided to come, and it was he pointed out to me that we should go along for moral support. So we accompanied John to Caltech. Now John had been a star there as an undergraduate, you know, and but they thought if MIT throws him out, you know, why do we want him? So they refused to accept him. And all he wanted was to be in a, you know, a lowly class of professor there. So his next stop was MIT. I'm not MIT, Stanford, where he had been a graduate student. And Stanford offered him to be a full professor with tenure, which is what is so obvious that he was one of the best people in all of computer science in the United States. And here MIT threw him out, Caltech wouldn't hire him. They're both idiots. So,
What about Feynman, though?
okay, so what happened is when John came out of that meeting and he said, you know, they're not interested again, and I'll try Stanford next, where he'd been a graduate student. So, so I offered to drive him someplace. He said, nope, nope, that's okay. I'm going to just fly up to Stanford, and you know, he had some transportation. So Marvin and I were, in a sense, stranded there. We'd gone just to accompany him, to lend moral support to him. Okay, so we have nothing to do. It's the end of the day. Everyone's home. And Marvin said to me, let's call an interesting person and see if he'll invite us over. And I said, oh, I know the most interesting person on the campus, Linus Pauling. And so I called him. They said, oh, Linus is in Europe someplace, you know, away. So then I said, well, so that was that. So Marvin says, let's call Richard Feynman. I said, who's Richard Feynman? You know, I didn't know. He told me he's a young physicist, a very bright guy, and so on. Okay. So we call him. He invites us over. And by the way, we had the most fantastic evening where in the course of that evening, we invented what later turned into Mathematica and Maxima, these systems that do computer arithmetic, as you know, that you can use. Those were invented by the three of us because Feynman had a problem and Marvin and I figured out how it could be solved by a computer, because he showed us this calculation that he and a graduate student and Murray Gell-Mann, who was also a physicist, the three of them had all worked on the same problem. Feynman had about 30 pages of mathematics. In this 30 pages, he kept doing one thing. He would have a horrendous expression, and he would make a circle around it and give it a new name, like mu, you know, some Greek letter. And in spite of that immense shorthand, all that could be determined at the end of this calculation was that the three results, a graduate student, Murray Gell-Mann, doing it, and Feynman doing it, that their three results were mutually incompatible. That's all they could determine. But they couldn't figure out where or why. And so what they explained to me was, this is more math than any person can do without making errors. And your error is made somewhere, you don't know where, because you have to make all these assumptions. Okay, so we invented what's now, doing computer, like Mathematica or stuff like that. We invented the idea of that kind of thing. And so when we got back, Marvin and I, Marvin decided that he would get his students at MIT to make the guts, and I should solve some other part of the problem, which is we tried to talk Feynman into the idea that you can type on a computer, and he refused. And he said, nope, I have to be able to write it on paper. And then, so what that meant was we would have to read his handwriting, which is 100 times more difficult than doing the problem. Okay, so Marvin cleverly decided I would worry about that part of the problem and he would worry about the mathematical part. So I started worrying about pattern recognition and handwriting recognition and so on, which they can do now, but then no one could do it. So anyway, eventually that resulted in doing computer arithmetic and Mathematica and other such systems came up. Marvin, discovering him was one of the best things that ever happened to me in life, because he was fantastic and a great person to know. And he Feynman, I've had these few people like Feynman